I'm going to start with the dry surface techniques. So you need to recreate the 8 circles that are here on the sheet. And with that, I'm just going to use the compass. Set up the paper with the information at the top, all right, so you know it, and your name. So you're going to have 4 different sheets of paper that are going to have all this information on it. So again, I would suggest starting with the compass, and to recreate these 8 circles, I'm going to use the compass, put the first one here, the second one here, and then the 6 down here. When you use the compass, I recommend starting with the one that's closer to the outside, and use the 1.25" mark on here, which is 1 inch is here, and that's this hole right here. So it's the 4th hole out. So I'm going to line that up here so it gets closer to the edge, put my index finger on here, and draw the circle. Alright, so that's that one there. I'm going to move this one over here. And then just continue that process, 3 and 6. So the first technique, anywhere that you see anything that says dry wash, okay, this one has a dry wash, this one has a dry wash, this is a dry wash, and this is a dry wash. So I'm going to put those dry washes in first because I have to let them completely dry before I even start with any other of the overlapping. It's called the dry overlap technique. So I'm just going to take a little bit of water in my brush here, take some of the excess off on the paper towel, and I'm going to start in with just any color here. And just fill the circle. You can see a wash is a watered down version of the color. And you can see over dry surface here how the pigment's coming out of the brush, and when it gets a little bit less, it leaves those white spaces. Going to fill that with that blue, and then just going to let that completely dry. Alright, so I'm going to move on to the dry wash here, change the color, clean out my brush. I don't have to match the same color, but for this I'm going to, and if I want to try doing a little mixing, I can do that. So I'm going to take a little brown. Looks like there's a little bit of a brown and a yellow here, so I'll take some yellow into the brown, and I'm going to do a little bit of water. I'm going to put that tan in there as a base. Using a square brush, so I'm a larger square brush, so it would allow me to cover more area. I'm just going to leave that light tan wash on the surface of the paper. This bottom one here has a dark wash on it, so I'm going to take I'm just going to do a dark violet. Maybe get a little more paint, because this one is the scratching, so I'm going to need a good amount of pigment in the space so I can scratch it away. Alright, now the fan brush, the technique right over here. I'm going to take some of that blue and some of the violet. Just do a little mixing here. I'm going to fill that circle with a blue violet. Get a little more paint. Alright, now that's it for the dry washes. I have to let those completely dry before I do anything else with those circles. Now the first technique up at the top here says a round detail brush stroked over dry paper. So I'm just going to use a small round detail brush like this, and I'll get some water on there. I'll pick any color here. I could do different colors as I go if I wanted to. And then I'm just going to start doing those lines. Now the variations in these lines happen when I change the pressure I'm putting into the mark. So if I press down harder, you can see I get a wider, then I can get thin, a little bit of that dry brush. I'm going to change my color now. A little bit of green and some brown. Let's do this murky color, see what I can get. It's getting kind of light, so I'm going to take some more paint, get it a little bit thicker, a little bit more intense. Okay. The flat brushes stroked over dry paper. I'm just going to use a flat brush. Now I can use a flat brush in a variety of ways. But use the flat brush in a way that allows for thick and thin lines to be created. It's just changing the direction of the brush, changing the angle of the brush. So if I want to create a thin line, I just use the side of the brush and just get that nice sharp line right there. It's a little dry, so I'm going to take a little more water. And then I'm going to turn the brush just on a little bit of an angle. You can see I get a medium line. A little more water. Try to get a really thin line. So I'm holding the brush almost straight upright. Creating a thin line. If I turn the brush as I go, you can see it can make a wide line, almost like calligraphy. I take in a little bit more paint and I hold the brush sideways and go flat. You can see I get a nice thick line, and it tends to dry out because I'm almost out of paint. So I come back, get some more paint, do another thick line. Medium line. Thin lines. Fill that space. Alright. Moisture leaves the flat brush, paper texturing occurs. So I'm going to get a good amount of paint on my brush for this one. And I'm just going to paint strokes like you see here. I've got a good amount of paint on the brush here, and the first stroke is very, very intense. And as I work my way out, the amount of pigment in the brush is going to start to dissipate. If I turn the brush over to, you can see it's almost creating a value scale, and the pigment is almost disappearing from the brush, creating that transition as it goes across. The next technique over here, the edge of a flat brush stippled over dry mottled wash. Now to create a mottled wash, I'm going to have some water, and it's going to be a little bit of paint. I'm going to take some of that brown and some yellow again. Again, you don't have to do the same color, but in this case a mottled wash is where you're just kind of putting it in really, really wet on top and just kind of modeling it in to different areas, allowing some of the white to show through. Mottled wash can also have other colors in it. So maybe I could take a little bit of the blue in here. Put that in, adding some texture where some of the colors are mixing together. Now I got to let that dry. So if I go to that first one that I did, top here, the round detail brush, all right, I'm going to take that really thin point of the brush to create the look of those reeds on there. Just take a little bit of water, make sure my brush is clean, and I'm going to take that blue and some violet, and I'm going to do it a little bit more opaque so that it's not as thin. You can see that's pretty opaque in terms of the way the paint is applied to the surface. So I'll take some of that blue violet, mix up a good, nice dark amount. I'm just going to start with the tip of the brush. And give the appearance of those reeds over top. Now, of course, this wash underneath is a lot more dry, so it's not blending. Any of this violet, if underneath was still wet, it would start to blend together and bleed. So I can see it's getting a little bit dry out here, so I'm going to grab a little bit more paint. Just recreate that. Now moving into this one, the flat brush stroked over a dry wash. It's almost the same technique that we did here, but again I'm going to have a little bit more paint on the brush now. So I've got a good brown, nice dark brown. Maybe I'll take a little bit of violet, mix some violet in with that to get a really nice dark color. And then I'm just going to put some strokes in. It's a dry overlapping technique. Getting a little bit light in color, so I'll get some more. And I'm pressing down more on the brush to get some of those wider strokes, and then you can see how it transitions out. Get a little bit more water on that, some more paint. And leave some of that texture showing through. When you get to the fan brush, we don't have a lot of fan brushes. But what you can do with the fan brush technique is you could use any flat brush. Clean it off so that it's free of color and it's clear of any color and a little bit more dry. And if I just take some paint over top of that, you'll take that blue violet again. More of a dry brush technique. And just barely touch the surface of the circle. You can see how it just kind of references some of that color on there. It doesn't really pick up a ton of color. I need a little bit more water because I'm not really getting a whole lot there. So let's take a little bit of color and get that a little darker to show a little more contrast. Okay. All right, the mottled wash that I did over here, not quite dry yet. So I want to let that dry. I'm going to do the line scratched into the wash with a blade. Instead of using a razor blade, I'm going to use a needle tool. It's just a pointed tool that will allow me to scratch into the surface here and just kind of pick up, scratch away some of the paint. You can kind of see it showing up. It's basically just tearing the surface of the paper, scratching the surface of the paper and revealing some of the white. I could do a hatching technique. You can see where it's most visible is over the darkest area of color. Alright, so that's why I have a darker wash on here. Alright, just to recreate some of the look of scratching and creating some texture to reveal some of the white. On the modeled example, again, now that that wash is totally dry, take the edge of my flat brush, I'm going to get a little bit of water on there, and I'm going to come in with the violet and brown, really dark color, a lot more paint, and I'm just going to use the tip of the brush to texturize. Changing the direction of it. See how that's happening? As the paint gets lighter, come back, get a little bit more paint on the brush. If that's taking a while and I wanted to try a different size brush, I could take one of the wider square brushes and do the same thing. Just use the tip of it. You can see how that point of the brush isn't quite flat anymore, and it creates a different texture. It's almost like stippling with paint. I don't like how that's coming out, so I'm going to come back with the smaller brush and recreate it. Just continue that process all the way around. Kind of bouncing it around. Makes a really nice, interesting texture with the colors underneath. And that's it for the dry techniques.